So how does the state as a concept, just as an idea, produce hierarchical organization that's oppressive?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the state is, by its very nature, a hierarchical thing. So I guess what I'll do is I'll describe what I mean by a hierarchical power structure. So a hierarchical power structure is one where the vast majority of decision making in society, the major decisions that form how society moves forward, are made by a very small number of people. Obviously, that scales, right? Like you can have larger number of people and fewer number of people making the decisions. What I would say is that the fewer and fewer number of people that you have making decisions, that's more what I would call authoritarian, right? If you have a very, very, very narrow group of people making decisions, that's very, very, very authoritarian. I often use a second descriptor, or I definitionally use a second descriptor for a hierarchical power structure, and that is that it functions on domination, which is to say violence, threat of violence, and deception. So it maintains itself through these features. It monopolizes decision-making power in the hands of very few people, and it maintains that decision-making power within their hands through the force of domination. And that is pretty much just what the state is, right? That's what the state is, always has been. The Marxists sometimes conceive, of course, that you could have a state that were otherwise, but we have never seen such a thing in practice. They conceive of it kind of abstractly, but when we look at their actual implementation, that it's always what I just described, a hierarchical power structure. Then by contrast, horizontal power structures, as I said, are kind of definitionally characterized by this concept of distribution of power, where decisions are made by a very, very large group of people. And once again, this is a scale. You can have more and more people involved, making it more and more libertarian in this sense. And the other impulse that's the opposite of domination is mutuality, things like self-defense, coordination, cooperation. These are the impulses of mutuality. So the thing about hierarchical power structures is that they are inherently simplifying of complexity. The universe is incredibly, incredibly complex. It is in almost no way simple. Nothing about it is simple, right? It is a complex system, and it is nested with complex systems in every single way. Our body is a complex system all by itself. Each one of us is an incredibly complex system containing many, many complex systems. And we are embedded in a bunch of different complex systems. And the thing is that when you try to simplify complexity, if all you're doing is kind of like gathering data, well, your data will be flawed because simplification of complexity just means you get bad data to some degree. It's really the danger and the damage comes in when the simplification that you did in gathering the data is then applied back onto the world, right? When that process of applying your simplified data back onto the world occurs, what you do is you try to strangulate the complexity of the world. You take your simplifications and you impose them on complexity. And usually it just doesn't work. Complexity is too much. It's overflowing, and it can't be simplified. It can't be put into the straitjacket. So instead your plans just fail. And that's what happened in the USSR all the time. They kept having these huge, grand plans, which James C. Scott says were high modernist, is what he calls it. This belief that you can just control nature and dominate nature in this sense. And those plans produced disastrous failures. Disastrous failures, not only in destroying the ecology, but also destroying the workers' movement. It annihilated the workers' movement in Russia. And so this is just what all hierarchical power structures do by their very nature. And somebody might be inclined to ask, why? Well, the answer is when you have a smaller and smaller number of people making decisions, that means a smaller and smaller number of people are receiving information. The information is being filtered through a smaller and smaller bottleneck, right? What you want, if you're trying to get a huge, complicated data set, you want lots of nodes for measurement, lots of tools doing the measurement, or a tool that has an enormous bandwidth for measurement, right? You need one or the other. But when you look at a hierarchical power structure, we're all just humans. Nobody actually has some magical special ability to gather all of the information that comprises the true complexity of the universe. So what they get by nature, is a reduced version of all of the data, which James C. Scott calls legible data. Data is made legible to those people, and by being made legible to a very small group of people, that guarantees the simplification process. And when they use domination, which is that other feature of hierarchical power, in order to impose it onto the world, it does horrifying destruction to any system that it interacts with. So that is the systemic reason why hierarchy often leads to such disastrous results.